Okay.
All right.
All right. We're live. Woo! It's been a while.
Woo.
I know.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to Sound Engagement, everyone.
Welcome to Sound. Welcome to Sound Engagement. Yes,
That's
I know.
our intro.
It's been a while. Once you tell, well, you and I have been pretty busy.
Yeah.
So
it's just been a whirlwind couple of weeks for us. I don't know if we want to get into it, but we had we got COVID in our household. My wife was tested positive. We had other family members that tested positive, and then so instead of us going to church and not really sure, we went ahead and got tested, and just had Carrie got tested, and she had a few days where she was out, and then she felt she had like a fever, and then she had a cough, and she still kind of has a little bit of a cough, but it's not at all it's not that bad anymore. And
okay,
it was good. It was pretty harmless for her, just kind of a typical bout with the flu or something, although we don't get the flu a whole lot in our household, but if we did, it would be about that kind of reaction. So anyways, what's frustrating though, and when you don't have a really traumatic experience with it, I feel like people expect you to say, something really minimal about it. Like, well, we were one of the lucky ones. And just to minimize the, the fact that it was like, it was pretty small and it wasn't that big of a deal. And yet if you have a really traumatic experience, of course, that gets blasted everywhere, and everyone needs to know how dangerous this thing is and the devastating consequences it's going to have and how much we don't know about the virus and blah, blah, blah. You're supposed to just be in despair. And it's like, it's just adding to the fear factor. You can't even talk amongst your friends about it in a way with that kind of minimizes the fear. You're supposed to stoke the fear. You're supposed to say, oh man, it was miserable. We had to lay in bed for a few days. It's like, I don't know. That's a little frustrating because just on social media, it felt like you couldn't really say anything about it without offending people.
Interesting. Like even though you had it, you couldn't say anything, anything because you might make Johnny over here really angry when triggered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is, no one is saying that it's not having the devastating impact on some people. Right. I mean, but if it doesn't have that impact on you, are you free to be thankful, or are you supposed to just, I don't know. It just felt very discouraging. Like you couldn't celebrate. You're supposed to be just as frustrated as everyone else with it. And I don't know, man, we certainly offended some people by not taking it as or not being as careful. And I don't know. I'm not really like, I wish people didn't receive it that way. That wasn't the intent in talking about it like that. It was sort of like, hey, we've got immunity at least for a season. We're excited about. We're happy to have that, and that it didn't have a huge impact upon anyone in our home. And that's extended family. Everyone that was impacted by it, they had to lay low for a few days, and then of course we isolated. We did the full. We stayed away from people for the 10 days that they request. But all that to say, it just adds to this season right now, and kind of the topic that we're going on today, which is sort of hope for the weary. It feels like you can't be hopeful. Hopeful is a bad thing right now. You should just be despairing, and or if you're hopeful about anything, it's like the wrong things. Be hopeful about Joe Biden coming and fixing things. You can talk about that kind of hope, but anyways, I don't want to derail this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that we have some justification to feel a lack of hope, especially, where we're going, where we're heading because of what you're saying. It's like, it does feel less hopeful. Maybe we should talk. Yeah. Do you want to jump right in? I mean, do you want me to jump in, or you want to jump in what we're going to be talking about today? I mean,
I'll let
that's
you. Yeah.
unfortunate. Yeah. That is kind of, I am actually curious though. Like, who did you, without, you don't have to share names, but who did you offend? Or was it like people on Facebook or something? Or was it just, general?
Yeah. I mean, we had to take my wife had to take a post down because she felt like it was just stirring up too much friction with people, and it wasn't the intent. She was posting it kind of saying, why are we locking everything down? Why are we exacerbating the problem? This is, for the vast majority, this is not going to be something that's going to wipe you out. You're going to get through this. And yet it was like, well, you're one of the lucky ones. And kind of a reaction of sort of like, well, wait till someone in your family dies, and then you can say something like hopeful. It was like, whoa, that wasn't the intent, but that's okay. Maybe it's
maybe that person was expecting like a thank you for wising her up to
probably.
Yeah, we should send her a thank you card, whoever it was.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, it's like it's a mixture of family and close friends, and so we're not trying to stir it more than we already did, but it was just not received, and I think it's indicative of the nature of discourse right now. People want to, if you're not being if you're taking COVID in a direction that's, if you're kind of treating it differently than the mainstream media, you're going to get pushback for sure. And if you're at all talking about political things that are outside of the mainstream media, it's just, I think there's a lot of people that are accepting what they're hearing on the news about everything. About the good intentions of liberal politics, or the good intentions of critical theorists, and I don't know. Yeah, so we could obviously go in a lot of different directions on the topic, but
I want to segue right into that, because I think one of the things you and I just said, literally a few hours ago, we miss our fan base and we miss all of you all, and feel free to comment and say something, and love to hear what you have to say. I have a few, it looks like we have a few, some people on already. But I thought we would talk, I thought it would be good for us to talk about just feeling weary and feeling hopeless and feeling alienated and isolated, because I think everything that you're saying also can, that kind of pressure also does seem to cause a lot of despair and a lot of discouragement for quite a few of us. I posted something recently on just how many friends have been lost through political discourse in ways that have never been. That I don't think anybody has seen this kind of division since probably 1969, 1968, according to my uncle who was in Vietnam. He said that even during that time there was some kind of unity. You could kind of get together, but. I mean, we should probably kind of talk about some stuff. I mean, what is, because I think, the Bible does have a lot to say. Psychology has a lot to say about feeling lonely, feeling depressed, feeling weary. Why do we feel weary? One of the things that's been on my mind recently is the book of Habakkuk, and just, I love that passage where in the first 4 verses, he is just crying out to God, why are you making me look at violence? Why are you making me look at things that are very uncomfortable? Why are you, why are you causing, not hearing the cries of the Israelites? And I mean, it's really kind of an interesting passage, because the first 4 verses, he's very discouraged. And, right after he says that, God obviously comes down and he talks to him and he engages with him, but it's one of those passages where, I love it, because I think Habakkuk is he's feeling stuff that I think a lot of people who are Christians are likely feeling right now. I mean, what's really kind of discouraging right now is that, you have what looks like it's going to be a very unjust government that's going to be taking over, and people in power are less apologetic than they ever have been in our whole lifetime, whether it's helping quote kids transition when they're 6-year-olds or 7-year-olds. Whether it's defunding the police. We're talking about aligning, people who are in power aligning themselves with Black Lives Matter, who basically has made a whole platform on slandering our police officers. And we have really, when I'm looking at this, what's going on, I mean, I have nothing in common with a lot of the people that are in power. Yeah. And it's not like Tulsi Gabbard, somebody like her. I like her a lot. It's not like people that are good blue dog Democrats who really want to fight for, the middle class and the unions. And you and I could, we can maybe disagree on certain policies, but we have a lot more in common with right. The people that are going to be in power soon. Really do want policies that are likely going to administer a lot more evil. And what Habakkuk is saying is, how long do I have to cry for help? You think of the unborn. A lot of the things that were done in the past 4 years have been amazing for the unborn. That's all likely going to be completely washed. The law is paralyzed. Habakkuk was crying. Why is it that you've grown numb to the Mosaic law or to the God's law? And in today's context, I guess you could say just law in general, because we're not in Israel. Right. And why does justice just kind of not go forth perpetually? And he's asking some really good questions. And he's saying, the wicked surround all the people that are righteous, and Babylonian culture is taking over, and he is discouraged. And I think, just kind of talk a little bit about that. Like, man, it's discouraging. And I think it's easy for us as Christians to, start to question, well, what's the point? And kind of like what you're saying about critical race theory, we've had, we have had people that you and I have strongly, strongly trusted all of a sudden just go full woke, buying into all of the crap that's coming out from, the BLM movement and everything else. And there's no discernment whatsoever. I've got, we've talked a lot about that, a lot of churches that are buying into this. And so you're wondering yourself, okay, here are the churches that are buying into it. Here are Christians that are buying into it. Are we, why is the unbelieving quote James Lindsay, who's pointing out showing significantly more bravery than most pastors in any of these situations? Why is this guy supposedly going to hell, but everybody else is going to heaven? It's just like, I think this is really where a lot of Christians are at right now. I'm just feeling very weary and just like, man, should we just practice the Benedict option and just, hide and stick our heads in the sand and forget about politics all in general? Why speak? So those are just, some of the, I think that's where the psychology of the Christians are right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot to talk about there. I would say have you read The Benedict Option?
I have.
By Rod Dreher. Okay.
I have not. Oh no, I haven't read that book. I've read like a summary or something. Yeah,
because that's a caricature of the book. Is that he just kind of wants you to stick your head in the sand and isolate from the culture. Like, we've lost the war, so we're done. That's really not what he says. And Rod Dreher, for one, I mean, he proves that that's not his worldview in the way that he articulates, in his articles throughout. I think it's the American Conservative where he writes. He's about interacting with the culture, engaging culture, trying to push back against some of the stuff that's happening here. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for that.
It's a valid concern people make, but I just don't know that it's definitely not what he was going for. His latest book, Live Not by Lies, is actually really terrifying as well, because he talks about just the direction that our country is going into, soft totalitarianism. And he compares it. He interviewed a bunch of people in Russia prior to communism, and just talking about what was their experience, what was the culture like at the time, and how was it moving in that direction? How were they basically, prepared or conditioned for communism to to come in and take over. And it's incredible how much there is of, sort of parallel experiences here in America. And it's just evident that, but we're like voluntarily doing this. Like you don't have to tap our phones. We're voluntarily giving that information on social media. We're voluntarily telling everyone, what we think about anything and everything. And so if at any point a social credit system were to be implemented, it would be through the social media channels, probably. And in fact, those recent like terms of service changes, I don't know if you saw some of the kind of the
no
people getting worked up about that. It's because they're essentially saying we have access to your camera, we have access to your, that information. You gave us the right to it, and if we need to use it to, sort of promote safety measures, we will do that. And so they're talking about like using it to encourage people to wear masks, or to find out like, hey, you're in an area where a lot of people aren't wearing masks, so you can essentially police people through those measures, through those means. And it's concerning, definitely, to think that we're moving in that direction voluntarily. It's George Orwell plus Brave New World, Aldous Huxley. It's the combination of 1984 happening, as well as this Brave New World where we're voluntarily taking the pill ourselves, and we're entertaining ourselves to death, amusing ourselves to death, as Neil Postman said. Kind of putting ourselves in a position where we're just not going to be able to have the backbone to respond as we need to. But I know that that was a random tangent, but I do think what you're saying about hope in despairing times, you really have to kind of come back and say, define what hope is, because hope is not something that should be determined by your circumstances, right? And if we allow our hope to be simply what's happening around us, what we see in the world, then our hope is going to constantly fluctuate. Right, we're going to be going up and down, and I think it's natural to experience that. But a Christian hope is something that's grounded, something that's firm, because we're not trusting in our circumstances. We're trusting in the God who sovereignly ordains those circumstances. And so we can look at his attributes. Like when everything's falling apart around us, we can consider the attributes of God and see one who's immutable, one who's unchangeable, in his being, wisdom, power, holiness, justice, goodness, and truth. And we can reflect upon those attributes and be filled with the kind of confidence that's not in our circumstances, but obviously in the God who has placed us in these circumstances. And that doesn't lead us to more despair. We might question why we're in those circumstances, but it doesn't, we can know and have confidence that God is doing something for his glory and for our good, even in the midst of these despairing times. So,
yeah, I think what's hard though is I think I'm hearing that, and it's like you and I went to First Pres together and in Jackson, Mississippi. And I think if this was 2009 and 2010, and if our pastor, Ligon Duncan, was preaching that, I would feel really encouraged going back home, because I know that I have him, and I have the other pastor, Derek Thomas, that would preach at night. And then I had this solid group of believers, and I felt unified, and I felt encouraged, because I looked around me and I was like, I'm not alone. I'm not doing this on myself. And so I could go out there and what's interesting about today though, is that you have this element of abandonment and loneliness, which is real isolation, just this kind of, which brings up this kind of feeling of sadness, this feeling like this, which also brings up this a serious sense of despondency, because when you're looking around, you're even within the church now, you have a lot of people that are as you said, don't have the wherewithal or the ability or maybe the desire or maybe even the backbone to stand up to what's going on right now out of fear. And so I've never seen so much division before. And so I think that's what's just kind of interesting, where I think a lot of Christians are feeling really left out, because I think you could look at before the election, you had a lot of people just just not saying that Donald Trump was Jesus's choice on earth, but just all of those things that I was saying about where the far left was really kind of coming and where it is coming. There were significant portions of the church, from Piper to Keller to all these other people as well, that just kind of dabbled a little bit on that area, but were fine really penetrating the sins of the alt-right and all. I won't get into too much of that. I guess what I'm saying is, it just seems like that intimacy, or that connection that we once had, like, hey, we're in this together, has been really kind of blown apart, which I think many people are really discouraged about. It's just, I don't know what you had to say about that. Just kind of, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get that we are in circumstances that are everyone's been saying it all year, right? Unprecedented. We're in unprecedented times, and the despair may be at levels that it hasn't been in our nation in centuries, I'm sure. I did come across an article this afternoon that said that depression has tripled this year in response to COVID-19, just the effects of the lockdown and everything else. And I think no one really is denying that, even those who are taking totally different approaches to the virus. Like there's a recognition that people are just hurting. People are in despair on all sides. Honestly, it's not just, conservatives that are in despair. I think obviously in response to the election, that has probably even gone up among conservatives to a degree that maybe beyond the three times as bad on the year overall. It maybe like 5 times as worse, who knows? But among conservatives, I just think regardless, the way we kind of pull ourselves out of that, or we don't just look at the circumstances differently. We don't just keep, putting the circumstances before us. In fact, sometimes we just have to turn off the news, right? We have to turn off the input that we're receiving. Sometimes we got to shut down the social media and get off of the things that are causing more despair or a hopelessness, because it can be extremely frustrating. It just compounds. But I would say that, the first step is just to be honest about it. And so you're right. Like take an honest assessment of kind of the things that are discouraging you, and then taking those to the Lord. And we see that in the Psalms. I love using the Psalms for prayer. I looked at Psalm 42 says, as the deer pants for flowing streams, so pants my soul for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? My tears have been my food day and night, while they say to me all the day long, where is your God? These things I remember as I pour out my soul, how I would go with a throng and lead them in procession in the house of God with glad shouts and songs of praise, a multitude keeping festival. Why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my salvation and my God. And he goes on to just talk about that, right? The despair that he's experiencing is based upon the inability he has to gather together with the saints, to reconnect with the people of God and to be encouraged in their worship of God. And I think that is absolutely part of what's happening among the average churchgoer today, because so many churches have shut down and they've done things online. And that doesn't mean they're not doing everything they can to shepherd and pastor their flock. But there is something about that tangible in-person gathering together that we need, and that we need to spur one another on. And it's not just the pastor that's doing the work on Sunday morning, right? It's everyone gathering and then listening in and hearing one another, how we can pray for each other and bear one another's burdens. You lack all of that when you say, well, we're just going to meet online. I think you lose far too much. And no doubt to me that among the Christian community, that is a significant factor in their depression. And there was a study by Barna that said, just recently came out, that said that the one community, the one segment of the population whose mental health improved during this time were those who were regularly attending in-person worship. Inside or outside, that doesn't matter, but that in-person worship, that their mental health improved. Like, it wasn't a significant increase, but when everyone else is declining, that's a huge thing, a huge factor.
Yeah.
So anyways, I'll let you take over.
Yeah, no, I think, I think it's more, I mean, I guess, I'm seeing it a lot as a clinician too. I mean, it's different because I think that what's going on is that you're starting to see people's like worst diagnoses amplified. And so if somebody had neurotic OCD kind of tendencies, they're on the neurotic scale of personality traits. Maybe they're a 7 out of 10. That's definitely gone up to like a 12. People who are a little bit more controlling, but in social gatherings, those personality traits are always buffered, so if I am a kind of a neurotic, somewhat OCD guy, but does have kind of a witty sense of humor, but I'm kind of but I'm somewhat of an introvert. When I have contact with extroverts who are a lot less neurotic and can kind of sharpen me, I get balance where I'm socially significantly more in tune with my environment. And so what we're seeing right now with the isolation and the loneliness is the lack of human touch, which, by the way, babies will actually die after like 3 days without being touched physically. And Susan Johnson, the founder of Emotion Focused Therapy, says, we're made for relationships. And I agree with her on that. We need touch. The couples, John Gottman said, that thrive the most are the ones that cuddle. I mean, he actually one of his biggest disagreements with Esther Perel was the fact that she doesn't believe in cuddling. So
she doesn't believe in it.
She doesn't think it's essential for relationships. And he had a serious qualm with that because, I mean, he did a lot of research on that, and cuddling is actually going to really save your marriage in a lot of ways, especially when you're not sexually, maybe not wanting to be with your partner in that time, for medical reasons or whatnot. You can do a lot of things. But anyway, going back, when it comes to personality traits, the personality traits are often buffered through social interaction, and so your biological traits are then kind of meeting the society, your social interaction plus your ongoing engagement with the community. And when you take away those two aspects, you get the worst of people. And then you get the worst of people on an online forum of kind of like basically a matrix that constantly tells you what you want to hear. And so you amplify your own, quote, worst traits in that type of matrix. And that's the one that we're seeing online. And so it's like, it only furthers more the emotional, intense alienation that we're going to feel inside. And so you take that and then you go on to, say, for example, online church. You're getting that same kind of that same medium that isn't necessarily separating you from your social context. And then you're going back and you're alienating yourself even more and more. And then people are like, well, where's God in the midst of that? Because the context of loving God and loving your neighbor are mutually, I believe, inclusive. You can't do one without the other. Jesus was very uncomfortable separating one with the other. And it wasn't just like love God and then loving your neighbor will trickle down if you love God enough.
Right.
That's the one main disagreement I had a lot with my old Presbyterian friends. They just kind of assumed, well, you just love God and you just preach the word,
Right.
loving your neighbor
Right.
will trickle down. That's dead wrong according to the scripture. It's actually they're both and you can't separate. And Jesus, I think, said that because it was like he knew the Pharisees were they were very good at separating those two things, and they really kind of thought that they could kind of get away with it. And that's why he said, well, you need to also, love your neighbor, and this is how it looks like. These three people pass the guy that's sitting on the highway. One guy's a Pharisee, one's a Levite. They just pass them by, and then, one's a Samaritan. And which one actually asked? Which one was it? And they were even uncomfortable with that question. Anyway, where I'm getting at is just that when you take all of that away, really does amplify the isolation that I think we're feeling. And I don't want to negate that because I think right now it's like, what should we say?
Right.
What should we say? I like what you're saying though, because we need to focus on the character of God. But like, how do you do that outside of?
I think what you're pushing back on, and so I would just clarify what I mean. I'm not trying to say it's not a big deal what you're going through. Ignore your circumstances, right? I think one of the best things we can do is simply listen to each other. Right, is be there for someone. And if you can't be there in person, certainly make a phone call, do everything you can to make it more personal as much as you can, instead of just a text message or a comment on social media. I think those things are important. And that's what we see happening, for instance, in Job, going through one of the most despairing experiences of any human in history. And he takes, the best reaction of his friends is the very beginning, when all they did was showed up and listened, or just sat and wept with him, right? And once they started opening their mouths to talk, they got into trouble because they started trying to justify why he was experiencing the problems he was experiencing, and trying to say, well, it must be because you're sinful. It must be because you're not thinking about God rightly. It must be because of whatever, it was all about trying to explain the circumstances, and we can't always do that. So part of knowing God rightly is that we would properly put him sovereign, and then increase our trust in his goodness, even in the midst of our own suffering. I'm not suggesting that that's easy, but I would just say that.
I know it was a pushback. It was like just
yeah. No, sure. I think it's right. I think it's good though. Like I think I don't want to come across like that. And if there's any sense that people are hearing that, then I think you have to. I want to clarify, but. No, I just think you have to start there with a proper understanding of hope, and hope in something that is grounded and firm and not changing. Your circumstances cannot be that for you, right. Because they're constantly going to change. But in those changing circumstances, where do you go? Well, you go to God in prayer, and you're honest before him. You cry out to him in despair. Mm-hmm. And you know that he's there listening, and that he's with you in that suffering, and that you're actually gaining a greater insight into the Savior and his suffering on our behalf. And so there's something sanctifying about our suffering in that sense. But I think so. Just in terms of thinking through, what do we do to pull to kind of refocus our minds, so that we go through these trials and tribulations in a way that's actually healthy and productive. The last thing we want to do is isolate ourselves further and keep it to ourselves, right? To be dishonest with others when they ask us how we're doing, and say, I'm fine, we're good. So to be dishonest about that, certainly before God, but also with one another. And then I think, meditating on things that are true, lovely, good, pleasant, Philippians 4, this idea that if you're just filling your mind with things that are discouraging, then what do you expect but to be discouraged?
Yeah.
You've got to start replacing your inputs with something that is more hopeful and rewarding.
Well, and also too, yeah, I like what you're saying. I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to, no, I like, no, I didn't think you were being insensitive or anything, but I do want to say too, I wanted to add to that was, just like looking over that passage in Habakkuk, because sometimes God takes the fear even more so that we become more resilient. I mean, going back in that passage right after Habakkuk says that, he says, why do you put up with wrongdoing? In other words, why do you just look at it and just kind of put up with it? Destruction and violence comfort me. Conflict is present, and one must endure strife. And law lacks power. Indeed, the wicked intimidate the innocent, so there's a reason justice is perverted. And then right after that, God says, look upon the nations. I'm going to have you're going to be totally shocked and amazed. And I'm actually about to empower the Babylonians. And I'm going to make, that ruthless and greedy nation, they're going to sweep across the earth. And they're going to just take things that don't even belong to them. And they are frightening and they are terrifying. In other words, God says to Habakkuk, it's like, hey, you haven't even seen anything yet. It's going to get a lot worse. That nation right over there, and there you could read a lot of commentaries on like the things that Babylonian culture would do when they would take over. It's pretty awful stuff, So, and then it's almost like he's getting him ready to say, yeah, you're suffering now, but guess what? There's going to be significantly worse. And I'm going to tell you about it. And I do think there's maybe an element of that sometimes goes on when we feel this way. It's never as bad as it really could be. And the question really should be not so much why bad things are so bad, but why aren't things worse?
Yeah.
And I found that to be a very good, even just from a counseling perspective, a very good kind of like a cognitive behavioral anecdote that I say to myself, because it gets me out of my complaining spirit. It's the question is not like why things are so terrible. It's like, why isn't it worse than it should be? You know what I mean? Like why it should be worse, it should be much, much, much worse. And it very well could be. And so we don't know.
Right.
So I like this way. I like this way better. Yeah. All right. I'm still kind of toying around.
You must have a very wide screen.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So
yeah.
you appreciate the
view.
full Yeah. I mean, what do you say to someone who comes into your, who schedules an appointment because they're just unable to kind of get out of a funk, or they're in despair for something, and it seems like everything is just compounding on that? What's kind of your first step, or what are you hoping to do in that first meeting?
Well, the first thing is probably, what are they focused on? Usually it comes from a place where people are focused on things that they simply cannot control. I do think, and I like what you're saying earlier about like the kind of news that we partake in. I think if you are going back to Gottman again, he said, he has this thing called 5-to-1 ratio with relationships. Every criticism that you make to your partner, you need to replace it with 5 compliments or affirmations.
Yeah.
Relationally, that's how marriages tend to benefit. And I often will ask people kind of like, what's your ratio? And if you're focused on 20 things that you simply can never, ever, ever change, and maybe just one thing that you can, that is going to just weigh you down with a burden that you can never carry. So let's focus incrementally. And Jordan Peterson makes this point. It's like, you really can't change the world unless you clean your damn room, and that's actually really, really hard to clean your room. But it's so good for your mental health when you do it, when you just focus on the small, teeny tiny increments. And there's a really good book out there called Atomic Habits that talks about things.
James Clear.
Yeah, by James Clear. And he talks a lot about that. Like you can't think about the end goal. You have to think about your life incrementally. And so one teeny tiny step at a time. So clinically, I've seen people drastically improve when they go from that mindset to a different mindset. A lot of it is a mindset.
It's like the baby steps from, What About Bob? Right.
Yeah, right. Sure.
I learned so much from that movie.
Great. Oh man, I love that. It's one of my favorite. Thank you. Actually, I watch a movie with my wife like twice a week, and tonight's movie night possibly, or tomorrow is because I'm on. Yeah, I may watch. I think.
What About Bob, man?
What About Bob's awesome.
So good.
It's
and the baby steps. Yeah, I think it. Hilarious.
Not quite that. That. Way, but yeah,
maybe not quite that approach.
Oh yeah. I think that it's so funny. One of the writers was actually I think he had some practice in therapy, or maybe he had like 20 years of therapy himself. It was so well done. You could tell like he definitely knew the language really, really well. Whoever wrote that. So
it's one of our favorites.
I kind of talk, it's a mindset because, today with social media and, the things that we focus on are significantly more, I guess they seem so foreign to our ability to manipulate and improvise.
Mm-hmm.
So going back on, because we have to. This is why art is so good for people, and why creativity is so good for people, is because they could see these kind of teeny tiny creations, and they feel really good afterwards. When you're always on Facebook, when you're always watching the news, there's absolutely no interaction. It's all passive. And all it's doing is just building that second part of our brain, the amygdala, the reactivity. It's just recycling itself more and more. But there's very little I can actually do. The election is over. Yeah, I can make a little protest and do stuff like that. Right. But most of the stuff that I say maybe on Facebook, has it really changed anybody? Probably not. Will it? No, not necessarily. Maybe podcasts will, conversations will, absolutely, because we're actually communicating. We're communicating ideas for a really long time. But, I try to help people kind of focus on the smaller aspects and what they can control. Paying attention to the person that, you were just kind of alluding to this, getting away from your own own depression, and focusing outward on somebody that may need some real compassion out there. So, yeah. How about for you as a pastor?
That's good. I think, like I said, I always take them to the Psalms and I say, here's some prayer language. Start using the Psalms in your prayer, and cry out to the Lord, and with honest appeals. I also think I really like what you said just about taking the focus off of your own situation and finding ways to serve others that actually brings you up as well, right? Because you're aware that you're not the only one going through pain and trials, and for whatever reason, as you begin to love others and serve others, the Lord fills you up with kind of a contentment. And I think, being reformed, I think I also have an appreciation for just meditating and about God and his attributes, and then applying them in your life. So like recognizing kind of one of the ways we learn to be content is by resting in God's goodness. And, if we're restless, if we're constantly worried and anxious, then there's a good chance we're not taking a whole lot of time to just quietly spend time with the Lord, and to calm our anxious thoughts and our fears. Taking time to journal out our prayers, I think that can be really helpful. Sometimes you just don't know what to say or pray. And so again, going to the Psalms to help with that, but also I think writing it down can be a great kind of meditative process, because it slows you down. You're not just sitting there mindlessly praying, but you're actually intentionally trying to put a thought together. And sometimes that can help. But I think one of the best things we can do is just be around other people.
Yeah.
be around those who can sympathize with us, who will have compassion, and who will allow us to be honest with them. I think that's something that right now is needed, and probably is, I would say, maybe the main factor in the skyrocket in depression is just that people are not around one another as often, and that isolation is.
And what you're saying, like when you started the podcast, you get judged for it,
right?
If you hang out,
exactly.
judge, you're going to get looks, you're going to get some lecture from somebody else. How dare you? It's we're killing ourselves by not getting COVID in a lot of ways. So
exactly. The cure has been worse than the disease, for sure, in my opinion. But
I think this is just like one of those, I wanted to say hello to everybody. And because I think a lot of us are, I think I've definitely had some funks this year. I'm not in a funk now. I think I just got out of one. I'm getting out of it. It took a while. And actually I shared that a few podcasts ago. It was really going back to church.
That's what I was going to say. You mentioned that. So
yeah, I mean, it was 8 months. It was 8 months, not partaking in the body. It's just, I haven't experienced that since I was a non-Christian, when I was just converted, or excuse me, I confessed, but then I just didn't enter into church for about a year, and lived a pretty just kind of, let's just say, prodigal lifestyle. God's been merciful to me this year. I mean, I've just been home, but it's still just like the depression just came back, and it was hard. And it was just about 2 months ago, I just said, we have to go. We would literally have to go. I can't do the online. I can't do no. I mean, I think we should probably end with anything you want to encourage. If there is a listener that's like really, really discouraged right now, and I don't know if you want me to go first. You want to go first? Anything that you want to say to them? Or,
yeah. Well, if you've got something on your mind initially, go ahead and say that. And
yeah. I mean, I think I wanted to say this too, because I wanted to, say that we hear you, and we've definitely been there. We felt that, and we grieve with you. I mean, one of the beautiful things about Christianity is that we have a God that wept. Jesus weeps. Twice. I think it's recorded in the Bible. And so it's beautiful that we have the incarnation that's communicated to us. We have a God that's not just separate from our pain, or but hears our cries and even understands our cries from a very compassionate human, in a human way, because he's been there himself. And I think of the passage where just where we're to cast our cares upon him, for he cares for you. And and just but that suffering is to be expected. And what likely, and also I like what you said earlier too, is like the kingdom of God is always working underground. If I could just kind of emphasize that, we don't really know what God has in store, and it's not going to be through a policy, and it's not going to be through a leader that's ever going to stop his kingdom. It's going to be, it's unstoppable. And if anything, it thrives on fire when people try to burn it down, because it uses that fire to grow something greater. It's the only living thing that thrives through destruction, because it overcomes chaos. It overcomes death. That's the beauty of the cross. It overcomes the very thing that everybody was terrified of, which is death, and it's just, the Bible talks a lot about that, and just, man. So just stay, I like, stay as much as you can with things that you can control, but also on the God that can understand and does understand your pain,
Yeah. And I just was thinking of Paul's experience, so just about every letter talks about some element of his suffering that he wrote to the New Testament church. And so he's a significant source of strength and encouragement in times of suffering. But in 2 Corinthians chapter 7, He says, make room in your hearts for us. This is verse 2. We have wronged no one. We have corrupted no one. We have taken advantage of no one. I do not say this to condemn you, for I said before that you are in our hearts, to die together and to live together. I am acting with great boldness towards you. I have great pride in you. I am filled with comfort in all our affliction. I am overflowing with joy. He's sort of clarifying the why he's had to be harsh with them in correction and rebuke to this church that was, not known for their compassion, not known for their purity. For even when we came into Macedonia, our bodies had no rest, but we were afflicted in every turn, fighting without and fear within. But God, who comforts the downcast, comforted us by the coming of Titus, and not only by his coming, but also by the comfort with which he was comforted by you, as he told us of your longing, your mourning, your zeal for me, so that I rejoiced still more. For even if I made you grieve with my letter, I did not regret it. I did regret it, for I see that the letter grieved you, though only for a while. As it is, I rejoice, not because you were grieved, but because you were grieved into repenting. For you felt a godly grief, so that you suffered no loss through us. Anyways, he goes on to say just the value that Titus was to him, a friend who could come and encourage him in his despair and in his own affliction, and then give him the confidence to send back, to them this letter that's rejoicing in the fact that they were troubled by what Paul had said, but that they were troubled to repenting. And there's something to that. I think when you get to the point where you think you have nothing to repent of,
right,
you're in a dangerous place. And so to be able to say, look, part of our suffering, we don't want to get to the point where we think that it's just outside circumstances. No, there's something in ourselves that's allowing us to get so worked up and despair over our circumstances. It may need to be that we evaluate what we're trusting, what we're trying to find rest in. Because if we're trying to find rest in politics, if we're trying to find rest in cultural ideologies,
right,
man, boy,
yeah.
we are just a shipwreck waiting to happen.
Yeah.
So again, it just maybe that passage just brings it all together to say, look, there's an element of that interaction that we need. There's an element of trusting God in these circumstances, and then there's just an element of being honest with one another and our own circumstances to say maybe we need to do some searching of our own hearts to repent and to take some time to to ask the Lord to reveal to us any wayward thoughts, any wickedness that remains, or anything that has become an idol, that we've begun to put our trust in that rather than God. So all of that, I think, is relevant to what people are going through right now. Anyways.
Yeah, no, that's well, what is it? Habakkuk 2:4, look, the what does it say? The one whose desires are not upright is going to basically fall apart or faint from being exhausted. So I like that. But the person of integrity will live because of his faithfulness.
Yeah, that's good.
And I wanted to say also too at the end of Habakkuk, since I'm talking a lot about this, there is a vision of the divine warrior that he has. That I have heard you. I've heard you, and our God is a warrior. His splendor covers the skies. His glory fills the earth. It's not just in teeny tiny little COVID laws. It's like, wow, it's so much brighter than that and greater than that. I mean, even like when you look at plagues and pestilences and diseases and stuff like that, those are simply teeny little displays of the battle that's going on. I mean, he's covering the whole thing, and it's just, I think we need that vision. It's just because it's very easy to kind of lose confidence when it's so focused on things falling apart, because we're really focused on things that have a natural tendency to fall apart, which That's what materialism is. So anyway, yeah. So no,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Well, I hope there was something there that can give some encouragement to people. I hope there's at least something there to take away from that. And I think it's been something that for me, I know immediately after election, there was some discouragement and just a hyper focus upon all things politics. And like, I couldn't even really study and prepare for sermons until later in the day, because I was so caught up on the news. And that, I mean, so when I realized I'm just not doing what the Lord has called me to and gifted me for. And it's not helping at all my emotional well-being. So I think, just getting back to doing what God has gifted you for and called you to as the church, but even as a believer, which, so the doctrine of vocation, like you've been given a way and a means to glorify God in your work. Even if it doesn't have to do with the church, right? You glorify him through your productivity. And so sometimes you just need to just get back to it, right? Get back to focusing on the things that God has called you to and gifted you for.
Right.
Anyways, I look forward to, continuing our conversation. I think we will get into the things that are discouraging as well. We want to talk about stuff that is building right now, because that's adding to the tension that people feel and the pressure people feel. Not because we want to exacerbate the problem, but because we do want to show another way, right? We want to push back against people who are promoting Black Lives Matter and promote individuals who are doing something that's a more godly and compassionate approach to biblical justice, and not just a social justice, a form of justice that's really not biblical. So anyways, because some of what we're talking about here, it's almost like we're saying, stop listening to us, right? Like we're only going to make it worse if you keep listening to our podcast. But that's not our goal, right? Our goal is not to add despair, but it's to say that there's another way. And hopefully by pointing out the problems in the logic and pointing out the theological challenges, the ways in which something is inconsistent with Scripture, we'll add a few more followers to push back against this cultural trend. And the Lord will bless that or not, but we can honor him in the way we attempt to do that, and we can do it with hope and confidence that we're at least doing it for his glory. And anyways, just wanted to.
No, I know. I hear you. I need to come up with something other than a black shirt, though. But I do clean this, and
well, we were all clean the last time, right? We were looking sharp, so both of us look a little bit.
Yeah, I do like your background a whole lot more. It looks a lot better than that.
I appreciate that.
Poor man's office.
It took a lot of work.
Is it the same room?
It is the same room.
Oh my God! Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. No, we've done a lot of work to it. I'm happy with the way it looks. But the church is we just had carpet installed last week, so my office was empty. That's partly why we haven't been able to have an episode, just because I didn't have anything set up. But we're getting back to normal again, with the new and improved, remodeled, not really remodeled, but just improving the carpet, and then we're going to replace the windows. And
we should talk about vaccines next time. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, hey, there is some interesting stuff going on with that, but we don't have time to get into it now.
No. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. And please subscribe. And we just kind of did on the fly.
Yeah. Merry Christmas. Focus on the gospel, the encouraging word of, just the birth of Christ. I think even focusing, what we've been doing this month is an Advent series, where we've really emphasized the second coming. which most people focus obviously just on the birth of Christ during this time, but Advent is the appearing of the Lord. So it's the appearing both at his first and at his return. I think it's this whole present age is something right now. And what is the hope we have of his return, which is to set all things right, to separate the sheep from the goats once and for all, to bring us into the celestial city where we can worship around the throne of God with saints from every age prior and every age after us. And this hope that we have of our eternal inheritance needs to be on our minds right now. That we need to keep that before us, because the things that are offered to us in this world to try to increase our hope are temporary in light of what Christ has purchased for us and what he has guaranteed for us. And he's keeping and reserving that inheritance for us. And so it's unfading.
Right.
Anyways, I think you can never stop talking and thinking about our future hope enough.
No, I agree. 100%.
Random. I don't know why I didn't say that earlier, but that was something on my mind. Was just to say turn your thoughts to the future that is secured because of what Christ has done for us.
We should get NP Wright on the podcast. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, his book on the resurrection is great. On that, the new heavens and new earth. I do like that.
Oh, it's very good. Yeah. Well, thanks everyone. Yeah, I appreciate. The people.
Yes. Thanks for joining us. All right. We'll see you. We'll see you next time.